I worked in data recovery for a bureau that officially didn't exist, processing old media like tape reels from the 60s, hard drives that had been through fires, and magnetic cassettes stored in damp basements for 40 years. The job was simple: extract the audio, label the file, send it up the chain, and never ask questions about why certain boxes were misfiled or how they ended up in my office. I found the case 77 box because the catalog number was wrong. Someone had marked it Case 76, but the seal tag said Case 77, Ural District, 1982. Inside was a single gray cassette with a handwritten label in Russian and a thin incident report printed on cheap paper. The report said a listening post was lost to generator failure during a blizzard. It said the men froze before relief arrived. The language was clean and administrative. I pressed play, a man speaking in Russian, calm and tired, like he was recording details for someone who would need them later, and the label identified him as Captain Mikhail. What follows is my reconstruction of his mental narrative based on the official incident report and the recovered audio, so here it is. The tape 77. I was in the back of an MTLB with 3 other men, the transport cabin so cold, forcing me to keep flexing my fingers to keep blood moving. Captain Mikhail, Soviet Army Corps of Engineers, assigned to Northern Command maintenance operations. They sent me because I was a fixer. Generator mechanics, electrical systems, diesel engines. The briefing said the listening post had lost power in a storm. Generator down, comms dead, no heat. Sounded routine. I'd done a dozen runs like this. Get the unit running, restore the line, bring the station back online. The security detail with me didn't talk, with Renko sitting across from me wiping his rifle bolt and Sokolov staring straight ahead. They were not my men, just escorts. The driver didn't look back. The wind hit the vehicle in bursts, and every time it did, the hull shuddered and the metal seams creaked while the heater ran but failed to keep up. The last weather report I heard said 50 below zero, the kind of cold that makes metal brittle and turns oil thick. After 3 hours, the driver slowed. The MTLB crawled over a rise and stopped. The rear hatch opened and the wind drove snow sideways, reducing visibility to maybe 10 meters while the searchlight cut a cone through the white before fading to nothing. The bunker entrance was a concrete mound with a steel blast door set into the front, and while it should have been iced over, it was not. The snow stopped 10 meters from the door where the ground turned to bare mud, slick and steaming. I stopped, and the security men stopped with me while Renko raised his rifle slightly. The blast door had ice around the edges, but the center was clean. Water dripped from the hinge housing. I put my gloved hand on the steel and felt warmth. If the station had been without power for days, everything inside should have been frozen. The door should have been a block of ice. The ground should have been stone. Renko and Sokolov moved up on either side of me with rifles forward, scanning the empty white. I found the handle wheel and turned it. The steel was warm enough that it moved easily. The locking dogs retracted with a heavy clunk. I pulled and the blast door opened, and suddenly the wind stopped and the sound dropped so fast my ears popped. Hot air came out of the bunker, humid. It hit my face and made my skin slick under the scarf. It smelled like stale sweat and copper. Sokolov swore, and Renko took a step back before forcing himself forward. We stood in the open doorway where steam came off our coats. There were no bodies, though the report said the men froze and there should have been bodies piled by the door, but there was nothing. The guard post was 10 meters in, behind a waist-high counter. A chair was pushed back. A mug sat on the desk, half full, but the liquid was gone. just a brown ring at the bottom. The telephone handset was off the hook, and the plastic looked soft, so I touched it with one finger and found it tacky, like it had been left too close to a heater. A pen on the desk had split. Ink was smeared across a clipboard in a thick blot. Renko and Sokolov checked the corners, then the ceiling. Sokolov ran a gloved hand along the wall and pulled it back fast. He stared at the moisture on his fingers. I stepped toward the inner blast door. Then I saw the writing. Someone had used black grease to scrawl words on the metal. The letters looked shaky. Keep it cold. Renko leaned in beside me. He read the Russian. He looked at the humid walls, then at the steam coming off our coats. "Captain," he said, his voice small, "what is this?" I didn't answer because I didn't have one. It was heavier than the first, painted gray, and while it should have opened inward to the station proper with the same design handle wheel, it didn't move because it was locked. I looked closer. The locking dogs were engaged. The position of the wheel told me it had been locked from this side, from the airlock. If the men inside were trying to keep someone out, why lock their own exit? If they were trying to keep something in, why leave the outer door accessible? I put my ear against the steel. It was hot against my cheek. And after trying the handle wheel 3 times with no result, I found a service panel near the bottom with 4 painted-over screws, opened it, and looked inside to find the linkage intact, but with a steel bar deliberately wedged into the mechanism so the locking dogs could not retract. Renko leaned in beside me and asked if I could cut it, and I nodded while the yellow bulb over the airlock flickered once and the deep hum behind the door changed pitch for a second, though the heat didn't change. We moved away from the door and started clearing the station. The mess hall was the first room off the airlock corridor. A steel sign in Cyrillic hung over the entry. Sokolov pushed the door open with his boot. The room was trashed with tables overturned, benches on their sides, and tin cups scattered across the floor, but there were no bodies and no smell of rot, just old sweat and hot metal. 2 chairs were stacked in front of a side door. Someone tried to barricade it. Renko pointed at the serving counter. "No food," he said. I stepped behind the counter and opened the pantry. It was stripped bare. The metal shelves looked polished, almost licked clean, with no crumbs and no dust. Everything was gone: cans, flour sacks, even empty glass jars. Sokolov stared at the empty shelves. "They ate it all," he said. "If they had run, they would have taken coats and rifles. They would have opened the outer door." We moved to the barracks. The sleeping room had 12 bunks in 2 rows with damp blankets and warm bed frames, while uniforms hung on hooks and pants draped over chair backs. But every pair of boots had vanished, along with belts, all the leather straps for holsters and canteens gone. There was a corner in the back where the floor met the wall under a pipe run. The pipe was sweating. Water dripped into a shallow puddle. A rat lay in that corner, not rotting, but dried out with skin pulled tight and tail stiff, looking like it had been left on a heater, and Sokolov turned away while Renko knelt without touching it and said it dried. We kept moving, and pulled tight and tail stiff, looking like it had been left on a heater, and Sokolov turned away while Renko knelt without touching it and said it dried. We kept moving. The medical office was a narrow room with a cot, a cabinet, and a desk bolted to the floor. The cabinet door hung open, and the bandages and medical supplies were gone. The cot was bare. Renko picked up a clipboard from the desk, scanned it, and passed it to me. The handwriting was neat and tight. Subject for metabolism increasing. Body temperature 105.8 degrees Fahrenheit. Caloric intake insufficient. He is looking at me differently. He says I look warm. I read it twice, and then Sokolov shifted his weight and the boards creaked under the floor, followed by a dull knocking that seemed to come from above us and around us at the same time, repeating evenly enough to count while the vent cover along the ceiling rattled in its frame, and Renko raised his weapon and aimed up with his finger on the trigger. And after 10 seconds, the knocking stopped so abruptly that it left us listening to our own breathing. Sokolov looked at me with his jaw tight while Renko stared at the vent, and my own breathing sounded loud over the generator hum that was still there, deep and constant, in air that felt hot and thick. Then we heard it again from somewhere else in the station, the same dull knocking without a clear direction, and we didn't move but stood there listening, trying to decide if it was above us or behind the walls. The knocking stopped, and we waited for 30 seconds, then a minute, with nothing happening until I said we need to move, and Sokolov nodded while Renko lowered his rifle with shaking hands. We backed out of the medical office as the hall lights flickered and the yellow bulb over the airlock went out for 2 seconds before coming back. The temperature kept rising and the air got thick. The emergency lights went red. A stairwell door appeared out of the fog. Steel, painted gray. A sign in Cyrillic said, "Lower level, authorized personnel only." I pulled the handle and the door opened, releasing cold air, not freezing but still cold, and we went through while I pulled the door shut behind us, so we stood in the stairwell, breathing hard as our breath fogged in the dry air. Sokolov leaned against the wall. He wiped his face with his sleeve. "What is happening to this place?" he said. I didn't answer. We started down. The stairs were slick concrete. The temperature dropped with every step. At the bottom was another door with a wheel lock that I turned to retract the dogs before pulling it open. The server room stretched before us, nearly black except for a single rack in the corner where green LEDs blinked evenly. Cold, dry air made my breath fog. In the corner, sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, was a man. He was wearing a lab coat, thin and dirty, with 3 coats layered on top, his face pale and his lips blue as he shivered. And when he looked up at us, his eyes were wide and he said, "Thank God," in a hoarse voice. "Thank God you are here." And when I asked who he was, he stood slowly with shaking legs and said, "Dr. Aries, chief scientist," that he had been down here for 3 days. And he looked at us, at our rifles, at our uniforms, and said, "You are military," and I nodded. "What happened here?" I said. Aris's gaze moved to the ceiling, the cold server racks. His breath fogged. "The treatment," he said. "The shots, for the cold. We tested it," he said, "on the crew. 7 men. It worked. Too well. They stopped feeling cold. But then it kept going." "Where are they now?" Sokolov said. Aris pointed at the ceiling. "Up there," he said. "In the heat. Can't survive the cold anymore." I looked at Aris, his breath fogged in the cold server room. "What was the treatment for?" I said. Aris's eyes went distant. "Cold resistance," he said quietly. "For extended Arctic operations. The soldiers wouldn't need heavy gear, wouldn't feel the cold. Command wanted men who could operate in 50 below for days without heat, without shelter. We altered their metabolism, their internal temperature regulation." He paused, shivering. "It worked. For the first week, they didn't feel cold at all. Then their core temperatures started climbing. And climbing. We couldn't stop it. It was like a nuclear reaction gone critical. Their bodies began producing heat on their own, more and more. They started seeking warmth because cold became painful to them. Then deadly." He looked at me. "We made them allergic to winter," he said. "This room. Only cooling. Only reason. Still alive." I looked around the server room. On the desk near the server racks was a clipboard with handwritten notes. I picked it up. The handwriting was shaky, different from the medical log upstairs. Project report. Day 12. Treatment administered to crew. Subjects report reduced cold sensitivity. Success. I flipped the page. Day 14. Body temperatures elevated. Subjects complain of hunger. Increased rations. Another page. Day 16. Temperatures still rising. Subject eating constantly. Pantry supplies depleted. They are eating leather. The next page was smeared with something dark. Day 18. They are giving off heat through their skin, their breath. The barracks feels hot. I sealed the lower levels, locked them in. Mistake, terrible mistake. The log ended there. I showed the clipboard to Sokolov. He read it and his face went pale. "How long will the cooling last?" I said. Aries shook his head. "Generator failing," he said. "Hour. Maybe. Heat will. Come down." Renko was sweating, his face flushed in the freezing server room. He wiped his forehead with his sleeve and said, "It is stuffy in here, like we just ran a mile." And then he tried to zip his jacket with shaking fingers before giving up and laughing once like it was nothing. We all watched him, me, Aries, Sokolov, frozen beside me. Aries asked quietly how long he had been sweating, and I said, "I don't know." And Renko looked at us with confused eyes and said he feels fine, just tired. Aries turned to me and said, "We need to go deeper, to the core where there is a manual coolant valve, that if we can flood the system, we can kill the heat and stop the reaction." And when I asked how deep, he said 3 levels, maybe 4, where the temperature down there is approaching 140 degrees Fahrenheit, maybe higher. And I looked at Renko, at the sweat on his face, at the way he was breathing fast and shallow, and asked if we can take him. But Aries shook his head, and if you leave him here in the cold, he might last longer. And silence followed while the server racks hummed and the green lights blinked evenly. And Renko looked at me and said, "Captain," with a small voice. But I didn't answer and instead said, "We are going deeper." We left the server room and started down. The stairs were narrow as we descended, the air getting warmer with every step. Aries, leading with his flashlight, pointed at the floor. "How far?" I said. 3 levels, he said. Maybe 4. The core is at the bottom. At level 2, Aries opened the door and hot air rolled out, and red emergency lights lined the corridor while the floor stayed slick. Behind me, Renko was breathing harder than he should have been. We kept moving. The corridor stretched ahead and the red lights made everything look dark. There were doors on both sides, most of them closed, but one stood open at an angle. Aries stopped at the open door and shined his flashlight inside. It was a maintenance closet where the shelves were empty and on the floor were shapes curled tight like they were sleeping, but they weren't sleeping. And Aries said quietly that this was the crew, so I moved closer to see the bodies dried out, arranged in a circle around a cluster of pipes that ran up through the floor with their hands reaching toward the pipes, like they were trying to touch them. They were seeking the warmth, Aries said. In the final stage, they clustered around heat sources. They died there. No one spoke. We moved on. The corridor continued and the temperature kept rising. Renko stumbled and caught himself against the wall, and though Sokolov asked if he was okay and Renko nodded, he didn't look okay with unfocused eyes and bright red skin, leaning against the wall with both hands flat on the concrete, his head down and shoulders shaking. And when I said his name, his eyes found mine, glassy and unfocused, and he asked if we already checked the barracks, even though we had. And then he said he needs to rest, just for a minute. Renko slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor with his legs stretched out in front of him, breathing fast and shallow, and he stared at the slick floor like he was trying to remember what it was. "It is warm," he said, and after a moment his mouth twitched into a weak smile. I knelt beside him and his skin was hot to the touch, "Renko, we need to keep moving," I said. He shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "This is good. This is where we should stay. It is warm and safe." He reached out and grabbed my arm. His grip was weak but desperate. "Stay with me," he said. "Why are we leaving? It is good here, warm and safe." I pulled my arm free and stood up. Renko stared up at me with confused eyes. "Captain," he said, "don't leave me." Sokolov met my eyes, tense. "We have to keep going," I said. Sokolov nodded, unhappy. I looked down at Renko one more time. He was smiling now, leaning back against the wall like he was relaxing in the sun. "It is so warm," he said again. "So nice." We left him there and moved deeper into the corridor. I didn't look back. The hallway ended at a narrow catwalk, and when I looked down, I made out pipes below us in the dark. We crossed as the catwalk shifted slightly with each step, and my boots started to feel too heavy while my legs felt wrong. We reached the core access door, and Aries stopped. His face was pale but determined. "This is it," he said. "The manual coolant valve is inside. If we flood the system, the temperature drops to 0 within minutes. It will kill the reaction. It will stop the heat from spreading." I nodded, and Aries turned the wheel lock. The door opened inward, and brilliant white light poured out, so bright I had to shield my eyes. "The reactor," Aries said. "It is running at full output." We stepped through, and the light was blinding, and heat radiated off everything until it felt like standing inside the sun. And on the platform was a cylindrical structure wrapped in pipes and conduits, glowing white through vents in the casing. Aries pointed at a control panel on the wall. "The coolant valve is there," he said. "Turn it counterclockwise until it stops. That will flood the core and shut down the reaction." I moved toward the panel. Every step felt like walking through tar. My legs were heavy and my vision blurred at the edges. I reached the valve wheel. The metal burned, but I grabbed it and turned. It resisted, but I forced it until the light from the reactor started to dim. "It is working," Aries said behind me. I turned harder. The light weakened further, heat dropping and cool air rushing in. But then the room shook, the floor vibrating and the walls groaning. "Keep going," Aries shouted. I turned the valve one more time until it stopped and locked in place, and the heat vanished, and a wave of cold air washed over me so that for the first time in hours I could breathe, feeling like diving into a lake, cool and clean and perfect. And I closed my eyes and smiled, thinking I did it. I stopped the reaction. I saved everyone, and the cold felt wonderful. Cold wind, the click and whir of a camera powering on. A voice cut through the static, speaking Russian. Not Mikhail's voice. Camera is rolling. Date is March 19th, 1982. Time is 2 p.m. We are at grid reference November 7 Delta. Search and rescue operation for missing hiker Viktor Belov, civilian, age 34. Last seen 3 days ago. The image flickered, grainy VHS quality in 4:3 aspect ratio, and the camera panned across a white landscape of snow and rocks with a narrow crevasse cutting into the mountainside. "We found tracks leading to the crevasse," the voice said. "They disappear at the edge. We are going down." The camera jerked as the rescuer clipped onto a rope, and the image swung wildly as he descended between narrow, dark rock walls with ice on them, and the voice said 10 meters down that the crevasse narrows here to maybe 1 meter wide, and the camera pointed down where the crevasse continued darker, and at 15 meters the voice said, "I see something," and the camera zoomed on a shape that was pale and wedged into the rocks, and at 20 meters the voice said, "I have visual confirmation. It is him." The camera stabilized as the rescuer reached the body. The lens focused slowly. Victor Belov was wedged into the crevasse in a fetal position with knees pulled up to his chest and arms wrapped around his legs, showing severe discoloration from cold exposure, eyes open and frozen, with his clothing discarded nearby. Subject is deceased, the rescuer said. Cause of death appears to be hypothermia. Body shows signs of paradoxical undressing and terminal burrowing behavior. Victor's hands were locked into a jagged piece of rock, fingers frozen in a grip. His face was pressed against the stone like he was trying to burrow deeper. I see discarded gear. The camera focused on a pair of leather mountain boots. Leather was hacked to pieces with slashes from a blade, and the soles were chewed. 2 meters to the left, the voice continued. I see a tool. The camera moved to where an ice axe lay wedged between the rocks with a steel head and wooden handle, and the handle had bite marks. The rescuer reached down and picked up a small object near Victor's frozen hand, a micro-cassette recorder made of gray plastic where the tape inside was still loaded. I found a recording device, the rescuer said, playing it back now, static, wind howling. Then a voice. Slurred, weak. The reactor is ahead. I can see the light. It is so bright, so warm. The wind howled louder on the tape. Aries says, turn the valve. Turn it counterclockwise. Stop the reaction. Save everyone. A wet cough. I am turning it now. I can feel the heat. It is burning my hands, but I have to keep going. I have to stop it. The wind. The light is fading. The heat is dropping. I can feel cold air. Cool air. It feels so good. I did it. I stopped it. His voice faded. I can breathe now. I can finally breathe. Silence except for the wind. Then nothing. The rescuer stopped the playback. Subject was delirious, he said. Advanced hypothermia causes hallucinations. He believed he was in a warm environment. He removed clothing and gear in response to paradoxical undressing reflex. He consumed leather and wood in desperation. He burrowed into the rocks, seeking insulation. The camera panned back to Victor's body. No evidence of external trauma, the rescuer said. No signs of foul play. This was environmental exposure. Cause of death, hypothermia. Time of death, estimated 48 hours prior to discovery. The narrow crevasse, the body wedged into the rocks. The rescuer climbed back up the rope and the camera swung wildly as he ascended. White peaks, empty valleys, wind-blown snow. No structures visible, the rescuer said. No bunker, no installation. Subject was hiking alone when weather turned. He became lost. He descended into the crevasse, seeking shelter. He didn't survive. The camera zoomed out further. The Ural Mountains stretched to the horizon. Vast, empty, cold. There is nothing here, the rescuer said. The camera powered down. The archivist sat in his office and stared at the VHS tape in the player. He had transferred it from the cassette found in Victor's hand. He had listened to the audio logs. He had read the incident report. There was no bunker, no Object 77, no listening post, no Soviet installation. Just a civilian hiker named Victor Belov who got lost in a blizzard and died in a mountain crevasse, hallucinating warmth while he froze to death. The archivist looked at the file again. Someone had stamped it with a classification marker. Case 77, Vostok Psychological Study, Archive Only. Below that, in smaller text, hypothermia-induced delusion documentation. Subject believed cold was heat, standard paradoxical response. The archivist closed the file and put it back in the box. He thought about Victor, about how the human brain tries to protect itself, how it creates narratives to explain the unexplainable, how it invents heat when there is only cold, how it builds bunkers in empty mountains. The archivist sealed the box and labeled it, "Do not redistribute. Some stories should stay cold." The story ends here, but the night is just getting started. If this helped you unwind, let me know and make sure to check out some of my other videos. Don't forget to subscribe and join the Nocturnal crew so you don't miss what's coming next. Hopefully, I'll see you on the next one.